Everblaze 17. What does red mean? Sophie asked, not sure if she should scream or flail or run to the nearest bathroom and wash her hands with an entire bar of soap. It means you need to get to the healing center. Does Elwin keep Piquantin on hand? I don't even know what that is. Lady Cadence sprinkled the silver powder on her own hands and rubbed it in. It's an acid, second in strength, only to alkahest, so it should be strong enough to remove our mark. Honestly, have you learned nothing in alchemy? Alchemy had been Sophie's worst subject by far, and she'd barely managed a passing grade. But she did remember the alkahest was the universal solvent, able to dissolve anything. Wood, metal, flesh. What's our mark? She asked, more than a little afraid of the answer. Lady Cadence held her non-glowing hands up to sniff them. Something I'm very thankful not to have on me. It won't hurt you, not by itself at least, she added when she noticed the way Sophie had started to tremble. But you must get rid of it. Quickly, did anyone else handle the device besides you? Alden and Keith, and Jurek at the sanctuary, and maybe some of the counselors. Plus, it was tangled in Sylvan's tail, so I'm sure it touched her. Lady Cadence rubbed her temples. They'll all have to get tested. She handed Sophie the vial of powder. Have them sprinkle this on their skin. Anywhere that glows red had to be purged. And if you need more, let me know. I have plenty of revel dust with my supplies. Revel dust? Sophie repeated, trying not to think about the words purged. It's a special type of spore that reacts to various ogre enzymes. It doesn't get rid of them, but I'll let you know they're there. Sophie studied her glowing hands. How come Alden and Sandor didn't know about this stuff? Because they never ask. And most of the reports I sent the council seemed to vanish into some sort of void, never to be mentioned again. I sent them all kinds of information about what I discovered of the true nature of ogre technology. For instance, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a necklace with a round silver pendant. This is a mark chain. King Dimitar, the ogre's supreme leader, gave it to me when he finally granted my residency in their capital, which was no easy feat, I can assure you. He told me I had to wear it at all times if I wanted to remain safe, and for years I thought it was a gadget, like the registry pendants we wear. But I was wrong. She rubbed her fingers along the edge of the spear and held out her hand. After a few seconds, her fingertip glowed green. That's the essence seal reacting with the evil dust still on my hands, she explained. Sophie shook her head, struggling to keep all the weird names straight. What does that have to do with our mark? Because they're both enzymes. That's the ogre's true brilliance. Their technology is actually quite simplistic, but their biochemistry. I had no idea until I knocked over a vat of revel dust while I was working and walked through the cloud it created. My skin glowed bright green everywhere. My pendant had touched me, and I realized that the mark chain is actually an ecosystem, a tiny self-sustaining world of microorganisms. She dangled the silver pendant in front of Sophie's face, pointing it to the nearly microscopic black holes that covered the outside like tiny pinpricks. Essential is an enzyme secreted by the colony of microorganisms living inside the sphere. As elves, we can see the enzyme, smell it, or taste it without revel dust, but the ogres can. And if they don't detect it on someone walking through their city, they know they're dealing with an intruder. Sophie frowned at her glowing red fingers. If the scent is so strong, why didn't Sander notice it? Goblins are the ogre's greatest enemies, aside from humans. Of course, their defense mechanisms evade goblin detection. The fact that elves can see or smell them is just a bonus. Sophie had to agree with the ogre's logic, though once again she found herself wishing that Sandor's goblin super senses were a lot more super. So then, what does our mark on the tracker do? She asked, bracing for the worst possible answer. Still, nothing could have prepared her. Lady Cadence held her green finger next to Sophie's red ones. Green would mean it's a tracker, Sophie. Red means it's a homing device. All of their weapons, and they do have them, though they're supposedly for defense only, use our mark as their targeting system. As long as they locked onto the enzyme, they're guaranteed a direct hit. You're sure Lady Cadence said Piquetin? Elwin asked. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, sorry. Piquetin? I don't know. Elwin asked as he searched the shelves of tiny bottles that lined the largest wall in the healing center. He cringed when Sophie nodded, removing his iridescent spectacles and resting them on his forehead, amidst his wild dark hair. Well then, I'm going to have to prep her skin. Nothing about that sentence sounded good. Relax, Foster, Kev said as he flopped back in the bed across from her. I swear I'm feeling more stress vibes from you than from Gigantor over there. He pointed to Elwin's office, where Sandor was pacing back and forth using his triangular shaped gadget to convey the newest information to the captain of his army. The thin wall that separated the office from larger treatment area muffled most of the conversation, but Sophie could still hear the tremble in Sandor's squeaky voice. I look like I've been dipped in foxfire, Kip said, wiggling his glowing red fingers. Think Dame Alina would give me extra credit if I told her I did this for school spirit? I think Dame Alina is more worried that we might have gotten arrow marks somewhere else, Sophie told him. The entire Foxfire campus was currently being swept with Lady Cadence's supply of rebel dust, even though Lady Cadence had assured Dame Alina that ogre enzymes only transferred when they were freshly released, like how ink only smeared when it was wet, and only stuck to living skin through direct contact with the Aromark source. Sophie, meanwhile, was much more concerned about getting in touch with Alden so he could arrange for Sylvanie to get treated. Once again, Alden was out of range, same with Lyric and Grady. Kip kicked the edge of Sophie's mattress, making Bullhorn, Elwin's pet Banshee, who must have been sleeping under her head, streak across the room with an angry hiss. If you keep squeezing your importer that tight, you're going to crush it. Sophie loosened her grip and took a deep, calming breath. It didn't help. Why aren't they answering? She asked, fighting the urge to fling the useless gadget across the room. And how can you be so calm? There could be ogre weapons aimed at us right this second, or at Sylvanie, or Alden, or the counselors, and if they lock onto this, she held out her glowing fingers, they can't miss. Yeah, but if they did that, they'd be starting a war, Kif reminded her. A war they'd lose, by the way, Elwin chimed in. Don't be fooled by a peaceful method, Sophie. If anyone is foolish enough to attack, we have ways to shut them down quickly. And the ogres know that. We made sure all the intelligent species know it. Why do you think they signed our treaties? He sounded so sure, and Sophie almost believed him. But she doubted the rebels, or ogres, or whoever it was that put the homing device on Sylvanie wouldn't gone to so much trouble if they weren't willing to pull the trigger. I think it's high time we get rid of the nasty stuff, don't you? Elwin asked, placing a flat silver bowl in each of their laps and warning them not to spill. Yeah, trust me. Sophie gagged when she caught a whiff on the clear liquid inside. Yeah, trust me, you don't want to know what that is, Elwin told her. Just soak your hands in there until I tell you to stop. Oh, and plan on it feeling strange. Strange how? Sophie asked as she dunked her hands in the bowl, but then she knew what he meant because the liquid seeping into her skin was equal parts fire and ice. It didn't hurt, but didn't feel good either. Mostly, it made her sweat and shiver and itch like crazy. Just hang in there for 10 more seconds, Elwin said, starting to count down. 10 seconds had never felt so slow, and when he finally got to 1, Sophie couldn't pull her hands out fast enough. Elwin took their silver bowls away and handed them each a green silky cloth. Whoa, Kif whispered, dropping the tablet into his lap. He clapped his hands a few times, then pressed them against his face. It's like I know my hands are touching me, but I can't feel them doing it. Sophie was just as numb, though she didn't find it nearly as entertaining. Doctors only numb someone if they were prepping them for pain. What's that? She asked as Elwin pulled 2 small red vials out of the satchel he always wore across his shoulders. Last step. And it won't hurt, I promise. Sophie stared at the hopping jackalopes on Elwin's stomach and reminded herself that she trusted him as he positioned her arms so they were straight out over the floor. It'll be less messy this way, he explained, which wasn't as reassuring as he wanted it to be. And don't freak out when you see what this does. It'll be over in a second. Sophie had to force herself to hold still as Elwyn poured the thin red liquid into her hands. She could feel the shiny fluid as it coated her palms, but that didn't make it any less horrifying when the top layers of her skin shriveled up and melted, dripping into the floor in a slimy puddle of peach goo. The smell of burning flesh filled the air and making everyone gag as Elwyn wrapped their hands in wet purple cloths. That might be the creepiest thing I've ever done, Kif said quietly, staring at his soggy purple dressings. I mean, it was also awesome, but dude, you should warn a guy before you melt his skin off. Sophie hated that Alden would have to endure the same process, and Jurek. And, oh no, she mumbled, struggling to grab her importer with her purple mummy hands. They can't do that to Sylvanie. She'll be traumatized for months. Hey, easy, Elwyn said, gently pinning her shoulders. You need to finish your treatment or it won't heal right. And I'm sure they'll sedate Sylvanie. I actually thought about doing that for you, but I know how you feel about sedatives, and I might have volunteered to be knocked out, Kif interrupted. Even if it meant spending the night at school, Elwyn asked. Oh, a slumber party. Definitely count me in for that. Yeah, well, somehow I doubt your parents would have wanted that, which was the other reason I kept you awake. You must not know my parents very well. They were always happy to be rid of me. Kif said it with a smile, but Sophie knew him too well to buy it. Elwyn must have noticed too, because he dropped the subject. Huh, he said as he unwrapped Sophie's hands. I thought for sure this would have been gone. He traced his finger along the star-shaped scar from Black Swan's ceiling. It must sink too deep, she said, as Elwyn snapped his fingers to form an orange spear of light around the scar. He squinted through his iridescent spectacles, turning her hand from side to side. But that doesn't make sense. That's Foster's trademark, Kif reminded him. Yes, I suppose it is. Elwyn flashed a green orb instead, frowning when he noticed her wrist. Why didn't you tell me you had a burn? It's not a burn, it's a bruise, Sophie corrected. I just used the wrong ointments to treat it and made it worse. And before you give me a lecture, I didn't come to see you because it wasn't a big deal. My skin just got a little twisted while someone was squeezing my wrist. Whoa, wait a second. Who was squeezing you? Kip asked. Give me their name and I'll punish them, Ch17 style. Nobody needs punishing, Sophie insisted. If anything, it was my fault. I know how unstable Brant is. I should have been more careful. You definitely do need to learn to be more careful, Elwyn agreed as he searched through his satchel. But I also think it would be wise to stay away from him. And either way, you must always come to see me when you have an injury. Okay, no need to shout. Sophie rubbed her ringing ears. Elwyn gave her a stern glare as he took her hand and rubbed a purple salve on her wound. Instantly, the cooling tingles eased the ache and the redness vanished. What ointment is that? Sophie asked, wanting to remember the name. It's called Get Your Butt at the Healing Center Next Time. Or you don't have a next time, Kip jumped in. Though we all know that probably won't happen. He pointed to the picture of Sophie in her humiliating opening ceremonies mastodon costume hanging over her bed. Elwyn should add a tally board so we can keep track of how many times you visit. I should add one for you too, Keith, Elwyn told him. You're starting to become quite irregular around here. Guess that's the downside of hanging with the Queen of Mystery over there. But don't worry, it's worth it. Sophie forced a smile, knowing he was only teasing. But he was right. Since Kip had been helping her, he'd had his skin melted off, gotten several broken ribs, and almost died. And Dex had been just as unlucky. Being her friend was dangerous. But she'd worry about that later. First, she needed to warn someone about the ochre enzyme, and with Alden, Jurek, and Grady still not responding to her hails, she could only think of one other person who might be able to help. She'd promised herself and Grady that she'd only turn to him in the most extreme emergency, since his duties as a counselor would always come first, and she knew from past experience that sometimes she had to bend a few rules. But having Sylvanie under threat of attack had to fall into that category. She grabbed her imparter, wishing her hands weren't shaking, as she held the sleek silver square up to her lips and whispered, "Show me Counselor Tarek."